I'm proud to give the William O. Douglas Award to my friend, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. Well, that's a wonderful welcome, but it's I who am deeply honored to be here with all of you. I so admire what public counsel does, and you help make its absolutely critical work possible. And to be introduced by such a longtime friend is a special treat. I love Mary and her wonderful husband Ted and their children and their grandchildren. So I thank her for those very kind words and also for the example that she sets as to what it means to be a real friend, because she is one. It's been quite a journey for us. I think we have a few more adventures still ahead. Now, I want to congratulate tonight's other honorees for their service and commitment to justice and opportunity. Rand April and Roman Silberfeld, Qualcomm and Arnold and Porter. Thank you all. I also had a chance to see Mayor Garcetti as he was leaving. I also want to thank Hernan Vera and everyone at Public Counsel. I really am honored to join such a distinguished list because I'm a recovering lawyer, as you know. And to be getting an award named for William O. Douglas is especially touching. He was someone who, as a law student and as a young lawyer, I reveled in reading his opinions. When Public Counsel honored my husband 3 years ago, Bill described Justice Douglas as, and I quote, a big, handsome, raw-boned, and wildly controversial man who could have run for office. And I thought to myself, so, just my type. Most of all, though, I am here to applaud you, to applaud the contributions that Public Counsel makes to people in need every day, and by doing so, really to communities and to our values. First and foremost, the rule of law and a sense of justice. For over 4 decades, this organization has recruited and trained nearly 40,000 pro bono attorneys who've gone to bat for countless families and individuals who needed you. Last year alone, more than 5,000 pro bono lawyers and volunteers assisted nearly 30,000 people, from vulnerable children to homeless veterans. And you've also helped other community nonprofits, and that sends a ripple far and wide. Public Counsel understands that law not only governs society, law must also serve society. That law can be an instrument for improving people's lives in addition to adjudicating their disputes and shaping our government. Your work makes the law a vibrant force for social justice, and you remind us that while the law should never privilege the rights of some citizens over those of others, we should not be afraid to privilege justice over injustice. And when Public Counsel was founded in 1970, that was a moment of great hope about what lawyers could do. I was still at Yale Law School then, and I was learning those same lessons. I had such an extraordinary experience during my law school years, working at one of the very first legal services organizations, taking on cases because they needed all the help they could get to represent indigent clients. And then one day, I saw on the law school bulletin board that there was going to be a lecture by a woman named Marian Wright Edelman at Yale. And I had just read about her in Time magazine. She was a 1963 graduate of Yale Law School and the first African-American woman admitted to the Mississippi bar as a lawyer for the NAACP in Jackson, a friend of Dr. King's and Robert Kennedy's before they were assassinated. She was altogether a remarkable person, so I went to hear her speak, and I was transfixed and in some ways transformed, completely captivated as I heard her talk about using her Yale Law School degree not only to defend people who needed defense, but also to start a Head Start program that could begin to try to break the cycle of generational poverty. And something just clicked in my brain, and I went up to her afterwards, introduced myself, and I said, I really want to come work for you this summer. And she said, well, I'd be glad to have you, but I have no money to pay you. And I said, well, that's a problem because I'm putting myself through law school, but if I can figure out how to get paid, would you let me come work for you? And she said, well, how can I say no to that? So I applied for a law student civil rights research council internship and received it. It was, just a kind of subsidy payment, but it was enough so that I could find a place to live and go to work for Marian at what became the Children's Defense Fund. That summer, I researched the plight of migrant workers' children who lived often without the basics of housing and even sanitation. And when I returned to school and began to volunteer at the New Haven Legal Services, I brought those lessons with me. Although the work I did there sometimes felt miles away from our classroom debates about precedents and procedures, it helped me see lawyers giving life to the concepts we were discussing and that I was reading about, using the law to solve the everyday problems that people face, getting evicted, trying to get divorced, trying to get benefits that they were due. And when I graduated from the law school, I had another extraordinary experience. I had been in the moot court program, and I actually was partnered with another law student named Bill Clinton, and we were appearing in the finals of our moot court competition, and the person who was the judge was a distinguished lawyer who'd been a star at the Civil Rights Division, John Doerr. So fast forward, I graduate, I go to work for the Children's Defense Fund, working for Marian, and one day, Bill gets a call, and then shortly afterwards, I get a call, and we're both asked by John Doerr if we want to come to Washington to be on the staff of the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee that has formed an impeachment inquiry to look into President Nixon. Now, Bill said, no, I've decided to run for Congress, and I said yes. And so I moved to Washington and began working with some of the most extraordinary lawyers I have ever met, taking great care, great discretion to examine any piece of evidence concerning potential charges against President Nixon. After President Nixon resigned in August of 1974, I moved to Arkansas, where Bill was living, and he was on the faculty of the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. And I had visited him there one time, and I'd met the dean, And so when the impeachment process ended, I had no job, so I thought maybe I should go see whether this relationship would lead anywhere. And that meant moving to Arkansas. So I called up the dean of the law school and I said, well, Dean, it is August 10th or 11th, and are there any jobs left at the law school? And he said, oh, I'm sure there are. Come on down. We'll figure it out when you get there. So I came down, and he said to me, well, here's what you're going to do. You're going to start a legal aid clinic. You're going to run the prison project, because law students often represented the prisoners in the state prison. And you're going to teach criminal law and criminal procedure. I said, okay. So that's what I did. And when I was setting up the legal aid clinic at the University of Arkansas Law School for the first time, I would send these young law students off to represent clients, and many of the cases were in Chancery Court. And the Chancery judge was making it really difficult for my students to represent these clients, because he insisted that the clients had to be qualified as indigent under a 19th century statute that permitted free legal assistance only when a person's assets were worth no more than $10 and the clothes on his or her back. So I took a client to court after a couple of weeks of this happening, and I was trying to qualify him, and the judge said, well, do you own a car? And the client says, well, yes, sir, I've got this old beat-up, truck that I have in the back. He said, well, how much did you pay for it? He said, well, I paid about $50 for it. He goes, well, then you're not eligible. And I'd say, but, Your Honor, that's the car he uses to get himself back and forth to his job. Judge said, I don't care. Statute says if it's worth more than $10, he's not qualifying. So I went to the Arkansas Bar Association and argued that the law should be changed. It should be updated. We shouldn't be going on standards from the 1870s. And I found it hard to explain to my students that we could deny legal assistance to people who needed the protection of the law. Oftentimes they would be seeking back wages from unscrupulous bosses, or they would be battered women looking for a temporary injunction. There were so many heart-rending cases. So I made the case to the State Bar's Executive Committee, and the judge made the opposite case. And thankfully, the committee endorsed the repeal of the statute. And we could begin to get into the courthouse with indigents who deserved the representation that the law called for. Later, I was delighted when President Carter appointed me to the Legal Services Corporation. And again, there were skeptics. We had to convince Congress that the law to help poor people was necessary and just. But we were able to triple our funding in those years, to put thousands of lawyers to work on behalf of more than 1 million poor clients, helping, again, families deal with the day-to-day legal challenges that they can't handle on their own. And often in those days, I would think of something that Eleanor Roosevelt said about human rights. She said that human rights begin in small places close to home, in neighborhoods, schools, factories, and farms. And there is no better tool to expand and enforce human rights than the law. We can and should use it to help more people in more places live up to their God-given potential. And that's why the work you do and the work you support tonight is so important. And I would argue we need you more than ever, because so many people in our country are facing very tough times, and they have to seek help because they can't navigate through our court system or an administrative agency without you. I had the privilege to travel to 112 countries, go nearly 1 million miles, and develop a perspective looking from the outside back at the United States. And we all know that America is strongest and our economy grows fastest when prosperity and common purpose are broadly shared, when people feel that they have a stake in what happens and can build a better future for themselves and their families. That's really at the heart of the basic bargain of America. No matter who you are, where you come from, if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll have that opportunity to build a good life for yourself and your family. And as I would survey my country from afar and compare it to where I was often struck by how vivid our values still are for people far away, who still see us as a nation of laws, who still believe in freedom, opportunity, liberty, justice, who have such an abiding belief that our system, despite whatever flaws we may agree it has, is such a better way to live together than any other yet created. That is part of the mission, as I see it, of the public counsel work. Yes, you serve individual clients. Yes, lawyers obtain what I would argue is invaluable experience, sometimes outside of your comfort zone. But more than that, you keep alive that fundamental promise that we give to one another and that we have to represent to everyone beyond our shores. It is critical work. It always has been. But today I think we need to be reminded, in fact, to remind ourselves of how blessed we really are, of how grateful we should be, and how essential it is that we do everything we can to make good on the promise of America, and at its core, the promise of justice. So it's a great honor for me to be here tonight to thank all of you and to salute public counsel. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Will you stand here like this?
And now you will have the unique opportunity to hear a question and answer session. Some questions have been posed by some members of the audience that Secretary Clinton will respond to. Mary Steenburgen and I arm wrestled to see who got to pose the questions, and she won.
Well, actually, they called me a few days ago and asked me if I would moderate this section of the evening, and they sent me the questions, and they were absolutely amazing questions about foreign policy and the law and things like that. But to be honest with you, a lot of these questions have been asked recently by actual journalistic heavyweights like Christiane Amanpour, Jane Pauley, and Diane Sawyer. And I briefly debated trying to act like a journalist, but then I had the feeling that might mean I would dissolve into fits of giggles, so I decided to go rogue and ask you questions I wanted to ask you. Some are issues, and some are just things that popped into my head. So are you ready?
Oh, I don't know. We'll find out.
You've seen things that most of us have never seen in our lifetime. It's just the nature of what you do that you've been privy to some of the most exalted moments and the very best in human achievement. And you've also had a unique window into the true sorrow of mankind, the heartbreaks of the world. And one of my, and that's very much at the core of the work of public counsel. And one of my favorite things about you is that you've never gotten immune to that. You've never lost your sense of outrage at injustice. And I think that's extraordinary, having seen so much. And how do you think it is that your heart has stayed open to that after all you've seen?
Oh, Mary, I think, part of it is I've been so fortunate to see so much of the best of humanity side by side with some of the worst. Mm-hmm. And I can think of so many examples of that, so that I am constantly replenished by the resilience and the determination and the optimism and joy of other people. For example, I write about this in my new book, Hard Choices. I wanted to go to the Democratic Republic of Congo as a Secretary of State to send a signal that the terrible conflict that over the last 20 years now has killed 5 million people and had become the epicenter of using rape as a tool of war was a priority for the United States. And there were people who said, really, there are so many other more important places you can go than to go to Goma in eastern Congo. And I said, well, I just beg to differ. I think that it's very important to send that signal. So secretaries of state usually get to decide where they go. And therefore, I said to my Africa experts, let's start planning a trip that will take me to eastern Congo. When I arrived there, I did not know what to expect. I had a number of friends who'd been working to build hospitals and refuges for women and girls who've been brutally assaulted. And as I was driving down the streets of Goma on my way to a refugee camp, people were waving and they were singing and they were jumping up and down and they were wearing brightly colored dresses for the women, and there was just a lot of activity on the street. And I've been in other places that are not war-torn where it's so desultory, it seems so depressing, and here I am in a place that is at the epicenter of so much bloodshed. And I went to the refugee camp and I met people there, and the conditions were horrible, and I was quite upset by some of what I saw, but at the same time, the resilience of the people that I met there. I asked one woman, well, how long have you been here? Nearly 2 years. What do you need? She said, we need a school for our children. We need to keep them learning, constantly looking about the future. And then I went to a hospital where these women were being surgically repaired from the damage that had been inflicted on them. And I heard some just horrific stories. But I also met all these women who were supporting each other and who had brought their children into the community that they were building. And I have seen scenes like that all over the world. Squatters who claim land in Cape Town and build a community with their own hands and then are joyfully adding to it year by year. Young girls sold into brothels who are rescued, who are learning to not only write and read, but sing and dance. So it's almost self-indulgent not to have an open heart when you meet people who've been through about the worst that can be inflicted on human beings, and they have such big hearts, and their hearts are so open to helping others. And I think that you can get cynical, you can get worn down, you can be just sickened by the corruption and the behavior of people in not just positions of power, but with big guns and the desire to use them. But there's always some person, some moment that calls you back and that makes sure that you don't harden your heart, because if you do, then you're no longer much use to helping those who are at risk of losing life and limb. So I try to keep in mind what I'm seeing and learning from in order to keep doing work that I think is important.
Well, you're doing that very well.
Thank you.
We've all seen the photo of you in the Situation Room watching the live video feed during the raid on bin Laden's compound, and I think it's one of the most extraordinary and compelling journalistic photographs I've ever seen. Tell us what was going through your mind when you were watching it all unfold, and did you sleep at all the night before that?
No, and you know, I give my version of events as I saw them in a chapter in the book, and I'll give you a little bit of context because obviously this was an extraordinary risk that the president took in ordering the raid. And for me, it was very personal. I was a senator from New York on 9/11. I spent much of my first term as a senator working to help the families of those who were murdered in the attacks. I did a lot to help rebuild downtown Manhattan. So it was very personal, and when I was in the Senate, I tried to constantly be pushing the administration then to keep on the hunt for bin Laden and to bring him to justice. So when I joined President Obama's cabinet, that was one of the things he and I first talked about because he certainly was committed to, you know, getting more energy back into the search. So fast forward in late 2010, the CIA, through extraordinary investigative work, putting together a puzzle that was impossible to imagine, picking pieces of information from, you know, many places around the world, and believing that they had a lead that led them to this compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. So when then Leon Panetta, who was the director of the CIA, came to me and said that he and the president wanted me to be part of this small group to evaluate the evidence and to make a recommendation, I accepted, but it was a stressful, intense experience because it was a small group. And what we were called to do was to really debate and argue over what the intelligence professionals had presented. And to have it red teamed by people who weren't working on it, hopefully to take out any kind of, you know, bias for action that those who had been hunting for bin Laden for years might have. And we went over it painstakingly in a series of meetings that I couldn't tell anybody about. They weren't on my schedule. My staff didn't know where I was going. And slowly but surely, we kind of put the probability that this was where bin Laden was, somewhere between 40 and 60%. Hardly compelling, but sufficient for me to feel like we should move forward. But there was a vigorous good faith debate in the group. Obviously, Secretary of Defense, Vice President, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, others who were at the table. And when I made my recommendation to the president, it was to take the risk and go after it. And then we had to decide, well, what would that mean? Would it mean a missile launched against the compound? Or would it mean some kind of a raid? And we all decided that if we were going to do it, we had to be sure of what we had done. And eventually the president made the decision to send in the SEALs. So this was moving very rapidly. They had to go in on a moonless night in Pakistan because they had to evade Pakistani radar, get over the border from Afghanistan, get down to Abbottabad. And the Special Operations Command planned it meticulously because they planned for every possible contingency. So the night before, I was at a wedding of one of my daughter's really good friends, and I was standing at the reception, and there were a group of young people around me, and they were asking me questions. And one young man says, well, Secretary Clinton, do you think we'll ever get bin Laden? Oh, my God. And I said, oh, I sure hope so. And I mean, literally, I thought that was so weird. Nobody had said anything like that to me in months. And then the night before the operation, I'm being asked this. So I excused myself after the dinner started, and I didn't sleep. The next morning, went to the White House with, with the team, and the picture that you're referring to, where my hand is over my mouth, trying to keep my heart, which is in my throat, from falling out. We are crowded into this small communications room, and we did have a live feed of the outside of the compound. So we saw the helicopters land, and one of the helicopters was supposed to land in a courtyard in the compound, but despite the best planning, meticulously done, the height of the wall was slightly miscalculated, and the tail of the helicopter hit the wall, disabling the helicopter. That's what I was looking at, apparently. I didn't know at the time. I was just so totally fixated. So we all were holding our breath, but because of the planning, there were other helicopters that could get in, get quickly. So they go into the building. We can't see anything there. And then we get the communication that bin Laden has been killed. Now, I want to add something which is in my book, but I haven't seen it in most of the other accounts. But to me, it was really meaningful. So before they could get into the helicopters and get out of there, and meanwhile, people are waking up. We know that. I won't tell you how, but we know that people are waking up in the neighborhood, and they're starting to climb out on their roofs, and they're wondering what is going on. But because they're living in a military garrison town, a lot of retired Pakistani military, about a mile from their equivalent of West Point, they're not quite sure what they're seeing. Maybe it's some kind of Pakistani military drill or something, but pretty soon somebody's going to call somebody. So our people have got to get up and get gone, and they have to blow up the disabled helicopter before they leave. And what did our U.S. military personnel do at that moment, a very tense risk? They took all the women and children out of the compound, and they took them around the back of the compound so that they would be safe from the blast of the helicopter being blown up. And to me, that just spoke volumes. They went to that trouble to get those women and children, who were mostly wives of they're wives of bin Laden and wives of the couriers who were there to serve him, along with a lot of children. And then, thankfully, they made it safely across the border with the body, which DNA proved to be bin Laden. But it was an extraordinary experience in many different ways, and a lot of little moments, which I write about along the way, that really put great pressure on all of us to make decisions. One of the toughest was, well, you're going into Pakistani airspace. You're basically violating their territory. They might scramble jets against you. Don't you think you should tell them? And I said, absolutely not. You cannot trust them. There are too many leaks. If we're going to do this, we have to do it on our own. But every decision was a hard choice, which is why I ended up calling my book Hard Choices. Thanks.
Your family came a number of times to visit our family on Martha's Vineyard, which are times I will always cherish. And I remember that one day you and I decided to go for a walk on the beach, and what this meant is that we had to get in a canoe and paddle across the pond to go to the beach. And this was when you were First Lady, and the Secret Service, you and I kind of amused ourselves by actually just getting in the canoe and paddling, and the Secret Service was trying to find a canoe, and they had loafers, they didn't have the right shoes, and they were awkwardly paddling, and you and I actually powered across that pond and beat them to the other side. And I think about that sometimes, and I think about the fact that you're just never, my sense is that you're never alone, or that your sense of privacy must have had a whole new meaning. And I just wonder if you could speak a little about what nourishes you in that way, or how do you adjust to a life where someone's always watching you?
Well, it's not easy, but
Yeah.
I've had a lot of practice by now, and the men and women in the Secret Service are extraordinary professionals, and we spend so much time together. We get to know each other, I get to meet their families, as does Bill. But it's an odd experience
Must be.
because once you're a president or a first lady, you are kind of never alone in a car. You are never alone at an event. And you are constantly having to plan ahead to at least a limited extent, because if you want to go to a beach or go for a walk, you have to tell them so that they can do their job, which by law they are required to do. But after a while, particularly because the quality of the people that have been with us for these long years, they rotate in and out, but they've all been really extraordinary, they know that it's an imposition. They try to give you more space. They try to, help you navigate in a way that enables you to have some privacy with friends and other people, so they're not right on top of you. But it is different. And every time I would get frustrated and I would say, okay, I'm done, I can't do this, give me something to sign, I'm going to sign off of it. They would give me one of these indulgent sort of smiles, and they would say, okay, but first you have to read our intelligence files and see what we're following and what the latest threats are and what people are planning to do to you. And I'd say, all right, okay, I got it. But so you just kind of get used to it and not worry about it too much.
Well, now I think I'm going to ask you the question that is the big elephant in the room. The one that everybody wants to know, and because you've known me for a really, really long time, you can't dodge this and you can't distract me by telling me how good I've been at interviewing you. You just have to answer it. Ready? Were you sick with envy that I became a grandmother before you? Not once, but twice. And exactly what kind of grandmother do you want to be?
Well, Mary really is a dear friend, but yes, I was sick with envy.
I knew it.
And I was particularly sick as she would send me these adorable pictures of her first granddaughter, Clementine. And she'd say things like, oh, she's so sweet. She puts her little hand right on my cheek. I'd say, I don't need to hear this. Thank you. But it also taught me a great lesson, because, I was getting, to feel a little sorry for myself. My daughter was married. I wanted to be a grandmother. There was no movement on that front. And so I would do things like say, oh, let me show you the picture of Mary's granddaughter. And my daughter would say, oh, that's fine, no thanks. I've talked to Lily, that's Mary's daughter. So eventually I just stopped talking about it. So this is my advice to anybody out there who finds yourselves in the similar position I was in until recently. Stop thinking about it. Stop talking about it. Quit sending articles about decreasing fertility as you get older. I mean, just don't do any of that. And somehow it may happen. That's my advice. I really am excited and looking forward to it. And it's funny though, because I've been on this book tour and I've done a lot of interviews, as you know, and people do say, well, so you got any big announcements you want to make? You want to tell us anything? And I doubt that they believe me, but I try anyway. I'm saying, look, I know I have some decisions to make, which I will make, but right now, I want to know what it feels like without looking over the shoulder of my new grandchild. I want to really be in the moment in as present a state of mind as possible, because you know, I'll only have this experience once. I've already run for president once. And so, I mean, becoming a grandmother is totally new and different for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for being a part of this beautiful evening. It's such an amazing, extraordinary group, and they're so excited to have you here and to honor you. And I was excited to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. My pleasure.